how does the Fed and the Treasury work together to ensure these payments clear? What does that look like? Because this is something that keeps coming up when we talk about these sorts of things, because people are obviously convinced their tax dollars are paying for stuff. But what does the real operation look like between the Fed and the Treasury?
Yeah. It's complicated, but it can be simplified. And so I'm going to simplify it, but the way that I'm simplifying it is not at all misleading. Okay, so what I'm saying is a simplification, but it is not dishonest at all. It's not misleading you. See, if you go back to the 19th century, the way that a government would spend, or go back to our colonies, the government actually printed paper money to make its payments. So you just ran the printing press and you made your payments. Okay? If you go back to the colonies, every time that, say, the colony of Virginia would pass a law authorizing the colonial government to print money, they also would pass a law to impose taxes. And the tax that they imposed was equal to, would generate the amount of revenue equal to the amount of notes that they were going to issue. Okay, so then they would print the notes up, paper money, make their payments, and then they would collect the paper notes back in tax payment. Do you know what they did with the paper notes that they got back in tax payment?
What did they do? Use them?
They burned them.
That's what I thought.
They burned them. Okay. That makes it very clear how things work. Did the Virginia colony need the tax revenue in order to make the payments? Clearly not. They had to spend the money to make the payments. They needed the taxes to get the money back so they could burn it. Okay? So the purpose of the taxes was to remove the notes from circulation to prevent inflation. It was not to allow them to spend the revenue, because they never spent the tax revenue. They burned all the tax revenue. So that is the way that it worked in the United States, really, until 1913. Okay? The Fed was created in 1913. We were an unusual country because we didn't have a central bank. Most other capitalist countries had had a central bank for up to 200 years. We got by without one. So we created a central bank. Now, what is the Fed? The Fed was created to be the Treasury's bank. So instead of the Treasury just printing up notes in order to spend and then receive them back and burn them, what the Treasury would do is have the Fed make their payments for them. So the Fed, since 1913, makes all the Treasury payments. How do they make them? Let's say that you're a contractor and you sell something to the government. The Treasury tells the Fed, please make a payment to this guy's bank account. Okay? The Fed will credit your bank's reserves. That's how the Treasury spends. And then your bank credits your demand deposit, your checking account. Okay? That's how Treasury spending occurs. Fed credits your bank's reserves, your bank credits your checking account. Okay? And how is this done now? It's all keystrokes. Okay? Now, when you, at the April 15, you got to pay your taxes. How do you do it? You write a check and send it to the Treasury. The Treasury then presents that to the Fed. And they tell the Fed, please debit this guy's bank's reserves. So the Fed debits your bank's reserves and your bank debits your checking account. Although now we all do it electronically. We file our taxes online and it's all keystrokes instead of paper checks. Okay, so the Treasury spends by the central bank crediting a bank reserve. The Treasury receives tax payments by debiting a bank reserve. It's functionally equivalent to burning the paper notes. Okay, the bank reserves are debited. Where do they go? It's just like burning paper notes. They're gone. It's just a debit from a bank account. That is how the Treasury spends. Now, in the real world in the United States, it's a little more complicated than that. We have some special banks, we have some dealer banks, and so on. But nothing that I just told you is misleading. And if we went through all of the balance sheets that are involved, when the Treasury cuts a check to the point where you pay your taxes April 15th, the end result of the balance sheet will be exactly what I just told you. There are intermediate steps that I'm leaving out to make it simpler, okay? But the end result is exactly what I just said. Reserves are debited when there's tax payments. Reserves are credited when there's government spending. That's all there is.